tells. He says, in reply, verse 30, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Jerusalem is actually south of Jericho. If you're, there in Israel, here we go. Everybody see the map? Here it is. You've got the Mediterranean Sea over here on this side of Israel, right? And then we got the Sea of Galilee up here, and you got the Jordan River that goes down the buttons down here to the Dead Sea right here, okay? And then Jerusalem's over here, over here on the west side of the Jordan River, and then Jericho's up north just a little bit. So a lot of scholars have said, well, here, this is already, wrong. The story is incorrect because Jesus is saying that this guy went down to Jericho from Jerusalem. Obviously, Jericho is north of Jerusalem, and so this is incorrect. Now, he was talking elevation. Here's what he meant. Jerusalem was about 3,000 feet higher in elevation than Jericho, and so if you're talking hills, he was going downhill, and so he was fine in saying that it was going down. Let's continue. So this guy's going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He hits a patch in the road where thieves would hang out and just wait for some, poor sucker like this fellow to walk by, and they did what thieves do. They jumped him, and they beat him silly. They stripped him of his clothes, and then they went away, and they left him there to die. That's what it means when they said they left him there half dead. Now, Jesus is going to introduce three characters. Three guys that are going to have an opportunity to be neighborly to this man in need. First guy is a priest. He says there that a priest walked by as he was going down the road, and when he saw the man, he passed where? On the other side of the road. So he's walking by, he sees the dude, he's laying there, stripped down naked, and appearing to be dead. He's unconscious, and he's just laying there. Now, if you don't know anything about the priesthood, you probably understand. Everybody's always derided this guy and labeled him as just a cold-hearted guy. But you got to understand the priesthood to understand why he does this. Most scholars agree that if this guy was in Jerusalem, was heading out of Jerusalem, he had been to Jerusalem for some work requirements. That is, as a priest, he would have to be purified, labeled as righteous so that he could go and perform his priestly duties wherever it was that he lived in Israel. So he had gone to Jerusalem to sacrifice a red heifer according to the law, to go through a cleansing ritual, and to wait outside the east gate for 4 or 5 days for another priest. When it was his turn, it was kind of like Walmart on Sunday or Friday, when it was his turn to finally confer upon him, the seal of righteousness. You're good, you could go and perform your priestly duties. And so he was on his way back from Jerusalem after this probably week-long trip where he had spent his own money, bought the heifer himself, and gone through all of these ritualistic cleansings so that he could perform his duties as a priest. It's not unlike you and I going to a conference or some in-house training for our jobs. Are you with me? So he's walking back from Jerusalem to his place, and he sees this guy who's half dead. Now, he knows full well, as a priest, that if he touches a dead guy, Leviticus requires that he goes back to Jerusalem and goes through the whole ritualistic cleansing all over again. That's why it says that he passes on the other side of the road. Roads then were a little narrower than ours, but it would have been probably 6, 10, 12 feet wide. The law required that if you came within 4 cubits of a dead something, which is about 6 feet, that you would have to go through the ritualistic cleansing again. So here's what that would mean. Everything that he had just gone and done for a whole week, he would have to turn around and go back and do. And he knew that if he did that, it was going to put a crimp in his wallet, because he had to buy another cow. It was going to take him away from his family for another week. And by the way, just so you know, priests made their money back then. If they weren't in the temple performing the sacrifices and providing for those who were worshiping there, they didn't receive a tithe from those sacrifices, which was how they made their living. And so every day that he's not on the job, he's not making money and he's not providing for his family. To take another 7 days away from that, you could start doing the math here for this guy. On top of that, here's probably the capper in his thinking. He says, I'm on my way to help a bunch of people in my home region worship God. Isn't that enough? So here's where the priest's excuses were. I don't have time. It's going to cost me way too much. It's going to take away from everything else that I have planned for my family and I, and I'm on my way to do some other good somewhere else. You think these are the things that perhaps take us as followers of Jesus Christ away from the acts that we could be doing to help other people in need? Anybody? They seem like pretty good excuses to me, right? I mean, we should take it easy on this priest. We probably fit into his robes a little bit. You know what I'm talking about? Jesus goes on with the story. He says a second guy comes by. He's a Levite. A Levite is from the same tribe as the priests. The Levites were the priest tribe. But a Levite would be labeled a Levite because he's not quite a priest. He's kind of like priest JV, all right? He hasn't made the varsity yet. So he hangs out in the temple and he helps out with the priests and he does all the priestly stuff that he can there. But he's, he's not quite a priest. He's of a different caste. He's lower in society. But he's still, beholden to all the rules that the priest is held to. So he has the same, inner turmoil as he approaches this half-dead guy on the road. Am I going to go through all of this stuff again? He'd probably just come from from Jerusalem with the same, experiences, the same week-long training and purification. He didn't want to go through it again. In fact, here's another thing that scholars think. Because it was an elevated trail, he was probably up on the hill, and he had seen the priest and his actions towards the dead guy, and he had said, all right, well then maybe that's okay for me too. Let's be clear about this. The generations of our church behind us, they see how we act, and they play off of our playbook. And we, in our generation, in this era, this age of this church, of church everywhere, we need to set the tone for everybody that comes behind us, because they're going to interpret service, they're going to interpret helping, they're going to interpret what the church does, largely in part due to what we do or from what we do. But the Levite passes by again. So here's what you got. You got two of the guys who would be the highest in the Jewish faith passing by this broken and beaten man on the road. The people listening, including the lawyer who asked the original question, were already starting to get uneasy because Jesus is about to put the smack down. And that's where he comes to this. Here in this next verse, he says, but then a Samaritan, verse 33, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and he saw him, and he took pity on him. Now, don't lose the gravity of this guy, the Samaritan. A lot of you may not know who the Samaritans were. Samaritans were a half-blood breed of Jew. That is, they had intermarried with Samaria inhabitants, and they had ultimately brought shame on the Jewish line in doing so. They were shunned, outcast. They were not to be associated with. In fact, if you had to travel through the region of Samaria, whenever you crossed the border out of Samaria, you were to shake the dust off of your shoes so that the dirt of Samaria did not stick with you. There were prayers in the Mishnah in the temple of the day that actually said something like this: God, we pray that your grace and forgiveness would be withheld from the Samaritans. That's what the Jewish boys and girls were taught to pray. A lot of love there, huh? Yeah. So this Samaritan guy, this guy who has no reason to stop, to help, this guy who would be seen as the lowest of the low, he's the one that Jesus elevates to the level of hero in the story. And he says, this Samaritan guy, read the verses with me. This Samaritan guy comes by, he stops, he sees, in verse 33, and he takes pity on him, and he says that he went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, and poured oil and wine on them, and he put the man on his own donkey, and he took him to him, and he cared for him. And then the next day he took out 2 silver coins, and he gave them to the innkeeper, and said, look after him, and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expenses that you may have. And then Jesus asked the Lord, he says, hey buddy, who was the neighbor in the story? And begrudgingly, I think without looking Jesus in the eye, the lawyer says, the one who showed mercy on the man. And Jesus said, yep, go and do likewise. So in this story, he says, hey, you want to know who your neighbor is? It's the people who are in need. The people who have need are the ones that you stop down and help. And through the story of the Samaritans, it gives us 4 things that we're supposed to do. Let me outline them for you here in the text. Ready? Go back to verse 33.